Good morning, and thank you for joining us today to discuss water quality management and testing in GSA lease space. Today's session is geared toward existing and future GSA lessors. My name is Justin Haas, and I am pleased to kick off today's session. I will also be the moderator for today. I work in GSA's National Office of Leasing and welcome you to this session. This session is being recorded and closed captioning services are enabled. If you have any questions, comments, or technical issues during today's event, please submit them using the question and answer pod. The recording, the PowerPoint presentation you see today, and the Q&A will be posted online and made available to all participants after this session. All right, at this time, I'm pleased to introduce our four presenters today who are industry leaders in their respective fields. First is Courtney Springer, Crofton Whitfield, Colleen McGann, and Brad Short. Courtney Springer is the PBS Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Facilities Management. In this role, Courtney has oversight of over 8,600 federally owned and leased facilities in the GSA portfolio. Crofton Whitfield is the PBS Assistant Commissioner for the Office of Leasing, providing national leadership and oversight, strategic planning, and policy direction for GSA's leasing program. Crofton manages a nationwide leasing portfolio of over 177 million rentable square feet of space with a total annual rent of $5.7 billion. Colleen McGann is the Director for the Center of Lease Policy, Technology, and Innovation within GSA's Office of Leasing. Colleen oversees the development of both policy guidance relevant to the GSA leasing program and technology tools to support regional leasing teams. And finally, Brad Short. Brad is our GSA's National Industrial Hygiene and Safety Programs Manager. In this capacity, Brad spearheads strategic initiatives and coordinates nationwide programs aimed at enhancing standards and promoting environmental, health, and safety best practices across the diverse GSA program areas. I'm now going to turn it over to Crofton. Crofton.
Thank you, Justin. And thanks to all of you for your attention to this important issue. Today, we'll be discussing water quality management and testing in GSA leased buildings. The health and safety of all federal employees, contractors, and guests who work in our or visit our federal buildings and our leased facilities are our top priority. As we will discuss later in this presentation, there has been an increase in cases of Legionnaire's disease across the country over the last decade, stemming from bacteria growth in building water and systems. GSA has implemented drinking water quality management standards for all its facilities and will be requiring baseline water testing in 2024 for almost every owned facility and leased location within our portfolio. The purpose of today's industry event is to reach out to our existing GSA lessor community and provide the necessary information to help you prepare for water quality management and testing in your buildings. The agenda for today will be as follows. First, we'll provide some context and background as why water quality management and testing is so important in today's environment. Next, we will discuss baseline water quality testing that will be required for each GSA lessor in 2024. We'll then provide information on how GSA will direct this water quality testing using a unilateral lease amendment sent to our existing GSA lessors. We'll discuss the requirements of this testing and what the lessors will need to do to provide GSA after conducting this testing in your buildings. Finally, we'll go over resources that are available for each of you to consult and advise if you have questions or concerns. We'll then conclude today's presentation with some questions and answers from this community. So thanks, everyone. And right now, I'll turn it over to Courtney Springer, who's the Assistant Commissioner for Office of Facilities Management. Courtney.
Thank you, Crofton, and good morning to everybody participating. It's great to see such a large group. As the Assistant Commissioner for Facilities, I am the administrator of all leases that are under GSA's control, and I just want to start with a thank you. we're all in the property management business. GSA, our lessors, we're all managing properties. GSA, our owned facilities. The lessors, the properties that you own and manage. The last few years has been very challenging for all of us. COVID changes and impacts, now water quality impacts. I just want to start with a thank you for all the work that you do. I know how hard your job is because I do the same job that you do. I want to also mention just a couple of items. When I talk about water quality, I always talk about this being something that just doesn't impact your building. It's not just something that impacts federal buildings, federal tenants. It's something that impacts all of us. One of the biggest eye openers I've received from my team over the last few years is the total impacts and how it impacts me personally, even at home. I've taken a lot of this information to heart. I've changed the way I operate humidifiers at my house. I realize that I have essentially dead legs in my house that I need to flush occasionally. So this is something today that you're learning about that just doesn't impact you as a lessor. It impacts you at home as well. So before we get into the presentation, I just want to go through why we're on this path. GSA has had orders in place to manage drinking water quality since 2016. Middle of last year, we decided it's time to update those drinking water quality standards, as that policy that we put in place in 2016 was outdating. So when we decided to do that, we decided we weren't going to do it in a vacuum. We didn't create the 2016 policy in a vacuum. We didn't want to update this in a vacuum. So we started reaching out. My team reached out to individuals at the state level, the local level, to CDC, industry experts, and EPA and OSHA. We had many discussions about what's being seen in the industry today, what's changing. One major impact that we noted as we were updating our water policy was the increase in the number of cases of Legionella. And discussions we had with some of the state regulators, they said you could expect up to 50% of the buildings have positive cases. So we started looking at that, and we started looking at CDC's website. Available to all of us here is on CDC's website is cases of Legionnaire's disease that have been tracked since the early 2000s. You can go to the website and see in the 2017-2018 timeframe a significant uptick. If you look at the findings from 2000, you'll see that there's a 9-fold impact that we've seen since the year 2000. So we decided as we updated our policy, we needed to take that seriously. As I mentioned before, Legionella, water quality, that doesn't just impact the federal inventory, it impacts your inventory, both managed for the federal government and managed for other tenants. We decided as part of our process that we needed to update all these items. Another thing that we noted as we were going through our water policy updates is we were getting a number of buildings through just normal routine testing that we're doing coming back positive. We've managed 24 facilities with increased levels of Legionella, and we noted that it was something we needed to impact and resolve. So GSA has dedicated a very large amount of money to manage water quality in our own buildings and our leased facilities, and I look forward to talking to you a little bit more today about what that looks like. On the next slide, you'll see what we're going to be testing for. This testing, as I mentioned, is the same type of testing that we're doing in our federal inventory with just a little bit different scope, but we're testing for the same types of contaminants. We're looking for Legionella, total coliform, including E. coli, looking for lead and copper exceedances. On the next page, Colleen will get into a little bit more of what we're doing and how we're doing it. I appreciate your guys' time and focus on this, and I look forward to joining you back at the question session.
All right, thank you, Courtney. Next slide. All right, so now that you know how we got to this point, you're probably wondering if this testing is going to even apply to your lease location. Chances are the answer is yes. We are looking at testing all of our leased locations with some reasonable exceptions. So we are relying on the changes clause in the lease. You'll hear the term unilateral lease amendment a number of times over the course of today, but we will be sending those to lessors, asking them to test specific areas in all spaces leased to GSA. There are, of course, a few exceptions. Some of them you'll see listed here. We assume if it's less than 60 square feet, it's probably an antenna and probably doesn't have drinking water associated with it. If we are looking at a lease expiration in FY24, we are taking that into account. That's not to say that we will not be doing anything to test those. We just need to figure out what the long-term strategy is for those leases before we expend the energy and funds in order to test that water. We are also going to be doing the testing ourselves for any instance where GSA or the government is responsible for operations and maintenance of that lease. And finally, this doesn't apply probably to anyone on this call, but we do have tenancy agreements with the U.S. Postal Service. We will be handling those separately as well. The lessor is going to be reimbursed to GSA for the cost of the testing specifically. The lessor is going to be required to submit very specific deliverables that meet the scope of work, and an invoice is going to have to be received as outlined in that unilateral lease amendment. We're going to walk through some of the steps in this process at a high level over the course of the next 30 minutes or so in order to provide you a little more insight into our expectations. So you're probably asking what this amounts to. Well, it turns out it's about 6,400 leases, 6,000 buildings. We do have buildings with multiple leases in them. We will be handling those in our phase 5. We are taking a phased approach to this. Right now, what we are in the midst or have just completed issuing our phase 3 unilateral lease amendments. You'll see as you review the phases here, we are incrementally growing the number that we're doing in each phase. That's so that we can take the opportunity to pause and reflect, make sure that we've got it right before we send out a larger batch. And then you have 30 days from the receipt of that to let us know what the test, receipt of the ULA to start to set up your water testing. As you can imagine, sending 6,400 of these is a lot of work. As both our policy wonk and our technology guru, we are relying on automation to do a lot of the heavy lifting for us. So something to be aware of is that we are relying on the data that you have in SAM in order to make sure these get to the right location. That being said, please make sure that your SAM information is up to date so that these unilateral lease amendments end up exactly where they need to be. Next slide. Since we are in the process right now of issuing phase 3, which is about 2,100 unilateral lease amendments, quite a few of you may or may not already be familiar with certain parts of this process. If you haven't seen this in action already, here's what to expect. About a week prior to the phase, so those dates were in that previous slide, so it's around the middle of the month. We are sending them out every 30 days approximately. What we are going to be doing is a week prior to sending out those unilateral lease amendments, so the contractually obligating document, we'll be just sending a general heads up email. That will come from no reply at gsa.gov. It may look like spam. I assure you it is not. We are not asking for any personal information. It is just simply a heads up. Watch for the email that will come shortly via DocuSign. So ultimately, the unilateral lease amendment will be signed when you receive it. It is unilateral, so once it is signed and sent to you, it is effective. So we want to make sure that you're just aware that it is upcoming and to watch for it from DocuSign. So again, we are going to be automating a lot of this process. We are relying on DocuSign and some other tools and tricks so that we can get this done as quickly and expeditiously as possible. Next slide. All right, so our unilateral lease amendment, when you receive it, It is one attachment, but it has two components. The components are the unilateral lease amendment and the scope of work. The ULA itself outlines invoicing, also as your not to exceed pricing. The scope of work, which is attached to that unilateral lease amendment, outlines your testing parameters, acceptable levels, which we'll refer to perhaps as exceedances a couple of times throughout this presentation, as well as any third-party testing qualifications. We will emphasize this a number of times today. You must have a third-party test or take samples within your space. Again, we have not to exceed pricing. That pricing is based on the square footage in the lease and or the number of leases per building. We did obtain an independent government estimate as the basis for those. So, just keep that in mind as we move forward. I also want to keep you all to keep in mind, this presentation is a pretty high level overview of the process. Your guiding document is going to be that scope of work. Please review it. The unilateral lease amendment has a lot of good instructions there, but that scope of work is what we're holding you accountable for. Please be sure to review that scope of work that you receive. While we don't anticipate any changes to the scope, we are again doing this in a phased process, so we have an opportunity to pause, reflect, and make any changes as appropriate. So be sure that you're looking at the scope of work that has been sent to you specifically for the lease in hand. Again, the scope of work could change moderately, it probably won't, but we also want to be sure that you are not moving forward with work that we have not yet ordered. So we want to make sure that you're doing what the scope asks. So you want to be sure that you're not getting very excited about everything Colleen's telling you about the process today and running forward and doing this on your own. You do want to be sure you have the appropriate documentation in hand. Finally, I just want to make sure that every phase we do pause and do a lessons learned, and we are incorporating changes there. So those who have perhaps received phase 1 notifications will notice that we have improved our process over the past 2 phases and will continue to do so. And now I'm going to talk a little bit about the not to exceed amount. Next slide. So our IGE is just that, it's an estimate. So if you find that this amount isn't sufficient to cover the cost of testing in your lease, you will need to submit a request for additional funding. That request should go to the GSA Lease Administration Manager, so essentially your GSA property manager. You will have to provide documentation of the pricing and a justification for that increase in additional funding. We will have a lease contracting officer at that point insert themselves, review the request, and reach out to negotiate as necessary. Ultimately, GSA does have the authority to determine whether or not a price is reasonable, and they will make a determination if the additional funding request is approved. Please keep in mind there's no guarantee your request will be granted. We do need to make sure that all of our pricing is fair and reasonable, and that we're testing the right things and we're not over testing. All right, and then now we've gotten through a little of the administrivia. So let's talk about what happens once you have that unilateral lease amendment in hand. Next slide. All right, let's talk testing. So now you've received your unilateral lease amendment. The first thing you're going to do is take a look at some of the resources we've provided for you online. You'll see this actually in your transmittal email with your unilateral lease amendment, but we also links to a checklist where essentially we are outlining for you the expectations for your deliverables. They'll make sure that you have a clear understanding of what we expect. I will say that some of our previous phases have come back and there's been perhaps a little bit of confusion. So be sure that you're referencing these tools like the checklist that we've provided for you. Again, you want to be sure that you're reviewing that scope of work. If you like to print things out, you want to grab your highlighter, make sure you're highlighting the expectations of you as well as the third-party contractor, sampling contractor that you're going to be working with. Also keep in mind that you do need to coordinate all that testing with your lease administration manager as well as the agency. Agencies will need at least 5 days advance notice of the testing. So you want to make sure that you're starting to do that outreach as soon as you receive your unilateral lease amendment. Also important to note, if there are levels of contaminants that exceed the threshold, you have to immediately let your LAM know and start corrective action. We are paying for the testing. GSA, this is something we're initiating. That being said, any of the corrective actions needing to be taken in your leased location are not reimbursable. They do need to be completed in order to comply with the potable water requirements of your lease. And so you just want to be sure that we're trying to maintain the health and safety of occupants and visitors to our space. You do need to send all test reports to a mailbox specified in your unilateral lease amendment. There is specificity about naming conventions and things like that, again, so we can rely on automation and not deal as much with the paperwork that needs to be managed for this entire process. We are going to have internal SMEs, industrial hygienists, taking a look at those reports, so just keep that in mind. And with that, I'm going to pass the baton to Brad Short. He is an industrial hygienist programs manager, who's going to tell you more about the specifics of the scope.
Great. Thanks, Colleen. And good morning, everyone. It's fantastic to see such a great turnout on today's call. Your commitment to addressing water quality really speaks volumes about the importance your organization places on health and safety, a priority shared by GSA. Today, I'll be delving into some of the nitty-gritty technical details of the requirements, building upon Colleen's earlier overview. At the forefront of this initiative, and something I'll probably mention a few times during our talk for the next few minutes here, is a requirement to enlist a third-party qualified professional to conduct the water testing for your team. As outlined in the ULA, your staff cannot conduct the testing. Providing this company with the comprehensive scope of work ensures they are fully equipped to plan and execute the sampling event effectively. From securing appropriate laboratories to identifying sampling results and understanding the reporting requirements on the back end, this step lays the groundwork for a successful water quality assessment. Now let's talk a little bit more and zero in on what GSA is specifically asking to be tested. Legionella-specific sampling locations for unique spaces include building common and GSA tenant showers, at least one sample for every 3 fixtures, all point-of-use outlets primarily designed for human consumption in childcare centers, and all point-of-use outlets primarily designed for human consumption or the treatment of patients in a health unit. Please note that if GSA does not lease a childcare center, a health unit, or showers in your facility, those unique requirements will not apply to your situation. Moreover, the key requirement applicable to all is the testing for Legionella, lead, copper, and total coliforms, including E. coli, for 10% of the water outlets primarily designed for human consumption. So these would be things such as your drinking fountains, your bottle fillers, your sinks and kitchenettes, things of that sort. It's crucial to clarify that this requirement excludes restrooms unless those locations serve as the sole source of potable water for occupants. In a smaller facility, testing a minimum of 5 outlets is mandatory. However, we recognize that there might not even be 5 outlets that meet this criteria. So if there are fewer than 5 outlets that meet the criteria, that's completely fine, but kindly ensure that the contractor documents this in the final report so our reviewers on the back end are able to easily identify why those outlets were not sampled. A frequent question that we receive is what areas of the building are appropriate for these fixture counts if GSA only leases a portion of the building. The scope requires water testing must be performed within the GSA lease spaces and all common areas to which GSA tenants and its visitors have access and would reasonably be expected to use. So let's explore a few examples of common areas that should and then alternatively should not be tested in this initiative. For instance, drinking fountains and bottle fillers near the lease space on the same floor are prime candidates for testing. Also, take into consideration the drinking fountains or bottle fillers on the ground floor lobby, which federal tenants and visitors would use when entering the facility. These areas see significant foot traffic and are crucial for ensuring water quality for federal tenants. On the other hand, drinking fountains on floors not occupied by our federal tenants are not necessary for this testing purpose. Focus your resources where they matter the most, where federal tenants spend the majority of their time. Once the testing phase concludes, it's crucial for the qualified professional to submit a comprehensive report. So this would not just be the lab report. This report should cover a range of required items that are specifically outlined in the scope of work. These would include such events as details about that sampling event, methodology, protocol, chain of custody, lab reports, photos, floor plans, qualifications of that contractor, and various other pertinent information. And it's okay if some of those terms aren't very familiar to your team if that's not something you've done before. The qualified professional that you hired will have intimate knowledge of all of these topics and will be able to identify what needs to happen. And that's one of the main reasons why it's so important that we send them the entire scope of work so they're able to review and give you guys an accurate price and make sure those end deliverables are exactly what we need. This thorough documentation ensures transparency and accountability throughout the assessment process. To streamline this process, GSA has developed a helpful checklist that Colleen mentioned earlier. This tool ensures that all necessary steps have been diligently followed, providing peace of mind for all parties involved. Let's leverage these resources to ensure a smooth and thorough assessment process from start to finish. Next slide, please. All right. Now, let's talk about what happens when there are issues. Not a situation that anyone wants to be at, but an important topic to cover just in case. Again, ensuring your hired professional grasps the full scope of work is pivotal for several compelling reasons. Firstly, it provides a clear understanding of the expectations and the requirements when they engage the laboratories that they will use for analysis of those water samples. This includes the mandate for labs to promptly report any concerning results after they have analyzed those samples. Upon receiving such alerts, these professionals swiftly relay this critical information to your teams, setting off a chain of protective measures to reduce immediate risk to occupants. Your team promptly takes affected outlets out of service, ensures appropriate signage is deployed, and promptly notifies tenants. All actions must also be immediately communicated to your GSA lease administration manager. Subsequently, as Colleen covered earlier, GSA mandates the implementation of corrective measures. To ensure effectiveness of these corrective measures, follow-up reports are diligently prepared and submitted to GSA, documenting the successful mitigation of risks. This process underscores our commitment to a swift response and proactive risk management, safeguarding the well-being of all stakeholders involved. I'll now pass it back to Colleen to tackle a few more important topics.
All right, Bradley, I appreciate that. I know that you're all probably wondering, once I've actually completed this testing, how am I going to get paid? We are trying, again, we're trying to streamline and automate things as much as we possibly can. So we ask that you're sending a copy of the invoice to our lease administration manager, and the specific point of contact will be outlined in your unilateral lease amendment. So never fear, if you don't know who this person is, you don't have to guess, it will be referenced right there. Your invoice would have to clearly break out the amount paid to your testing contractor. And also, again, we mentioned the naming conventions that we'd like to see for these documents. We are hoping that we'll be able to use automation to appropriately file them in our systems of record so that we don't have to, again, bog down our lease contracting officers with some of that paperwork. So copying GREX file at gsa.gov actually does half that work for us. We do require that you send that over within 3 business days after completion of the scope of work. Again, and you'll see in your scope of work that you are required to provide test results, whether or not there's anything, any exceedances. So keep that in mind. Next slide. And finally, what if for some reason you were unable to test your location? You are required, per the changes clause in the lease, to perform the testing. We do have the ability to make a unilateral change or a unilateral request under the lease. We require you to do the testing. However, if for some reason you notify us and you're unable to test, we will work with you to determine what that reason is. There may be an opportunity to either negotiate or come to a better understanding of the scope of work. Or we may determine, along with you, that it does not make sense to test your location for whatever reason. In the event that we do need to test, though, and you're still unable to complete that testing, GSA may decide to perform the testing itself within our leased space. Know that if there are any issues with exceeding a threshold in any of these contaminants, the lessor will still be responsible to remediate any of those issues, even if GSA is the one that performs the testing. So just something to be aware of as you're kind of working through some of the scope of work and challenges that you may encounter during this process. All right, and then I know we've referenced the checklist. We actually are putting together or are keeping up with updating a comprehensive site available to you all. It has frequently asked questions. It has that unilateral lease amendment compliance checklist that we referenced earlier that is going to be so handy in making sure that you're meeting the requirement and submitting deliverables that will ultimately meet our needs and get you reimbursed. We also have a water quality website where we have more information about water quality in general and GSA's steps. And then we also have a fact sheet. Links to all of these resources are available here, but actually you can just search the Google and it'll tell you where to find this information. And with that, I think I'm passing it back to Justin for Q&A.
Yes. Thank you, Colleen. And thank you to our 4 presenters today, Crofton, Courtney, Colleen, and Brad. Just a reminder that if you have questions or comments, please submit them now using the question and answer pod. We'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Also, just a reminder that the recording, the PowerPoint presentation, and the Q&A will be posted online and made available to all participants. So with that, let's now do some questions and answers and address some of the questions that have come in during the presentation today. Again, we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. So let me go through the list here. Okay, all right. Well, I will just fire these off to the presenters, who I think is probably the best qualified to answer. So Courtney, I'm going to start with you on the first question, and going through some of these questions. Some of them were probably answered during the presentation, but well, it's good to, I guess, reiterate those. So Courtney, the first question is, can a lessor use a test that they have already conducted for their building in the past?
Thanks, Justin. I get this question all the time, both on our own facilities and our lease facilities. We've done a lot of water testing since last year. And one thing I can tell you is water testing is very dynamic. You can test one day and you're dealing with an issue with copper levels. You can test another day and you're dealing with a Legionella issue. So for that purpose, we require this testing to be completed now using the standard we set forth. So a couple other reasons we require that: it's very unlikely that water tests taken before are testing for all the different categories we're looking at, everything that Brad shared and that I shared early on in the presentation. It's also highly unlikely that the water testing was taken in a fashion that we laid out in our scope of work with a qualified individual and processed appropriately through the laboratory with the appropriate report. So because of all those things, the dynamic nature of water, what we're testing for specifically, who's taking the samples, and how we want the results reported back, we feel that these all have to be done using the standard that we're setting out.
Okay. All right, just scouring through the questions here. Crofton, I'm going to direct this one to you. The question is, if the test results indicate a problem with the water in my building, who funds the remediation and any follow-up testing?
Good question, Justin. So again, the point of this is really that we're providing clean and safe drinking water for our customer agencies and for government occupants. We want to make sure that if there are any issues, we're initiating testing, under the contractual authority that Colleen talked about earlier, in terms of the changes clause. But if we do identify a problem during the course of testing, it is the responsibility of the building owner, the lessor, to remediate or correct any deficiencies that are found. So we'll really kind of begin working with the lessor's office or lessor's rep in this case to come up with those remedies. But it is the responsibility of the lessor to be in full compliance of the lease. And it's also their responsibility to perform any follow-up testing. And Colleen highlighted earlier, even if it's determined that GSA or the government will perform that testing, if there are issues or exigencies there, then we want to make sure that the lessor knows their responsibility and will be responsible for remediation.
Thank you, Crofton. All right, let's go to another question here. I'm going to direct this one to Brad. Brad, the question is, if my company has personnel that meets the professional qualification requirements stated in the scope of work or the ULA, can we perform the testing ourselves, or must we absolutely have to hire a third-party contractor?
Yeah, Justin, that's a great question. And I think Colleen and I both kind of touched on that, but it's really important that we reiterate this one. So in the ULA scope of work, we do require that an independent third party conduct this testing. So regrettably, you won't be able to utilize your own staff for this purpose. And kind of in a similar fashion, we also recognize that all water received from a public water system goes through regular testing for their distribution system and is reported in the Consumer Confidence Report on an annual basis. And I highly encourage everyone to review that for their facility. However, what we're concerned with this testing effort is actually the impacts of the facility on that incoming water. So the effects of the premise plumbing, if there are conditions that could potentially lead to bacterial growth, or if there's maybe components in that system that might lead to metal releases. And so that's really what we're concerned with when we're testing point of use outlets within a facility, is looking at the effects that the actual building plumbing has on that water.
Great. Thank you, Brad. I'm going to direct this question to Colleen. Colleen. Will I receive prior notification from GSA before I receive the water quality testing modification or the unilateral amendment? I think you answered this, but.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the ability to highlight. So we are sending a heads up email, essentially, watch out for your DocuSign unilateral lease amendment about 5 days before we send out that ULA. Again, it cannot be stressed enough that the data in SAM needs to be accurate. That is where we're getting our email addresses and contact information from. Our leases do require that you update that once a year. But if you happen to know that it's out of date and you haven't received a unilateral lease amendment yet, I highly recommend that you go in there and take care of that.
Great, Colleen. And I'm going to throw this other question to you. Can you again highlight how GSA is issuing the unilateral lease amendments?
Sure. So we've actually built an automation so that we can issue these lease amendments en masse using an internal process. From your perspective, you'll be receiving a unilateral lease amendment via DocuSign. That'll come in your email. That will be signed by a administrative lease contracting officer. So folks that have the ability and warrant ability to sign these types of things. They will be signing using DocuSign. You will receive a fully executed unilateral lease amendment. And at that point, that's when the time starts ticking. Again, so you want to be sure that you have your property management point of contact. If that's up to date in some of our systems, they'll be receiving a copy. An LCO will get a copy, you will get a copy, copies will be sent all around so people can document their files. It is really important to note that if for some reason that SAM registration, that email is not correct, please be sure if people on notice, if someone in your organization receives that unilateral lease amendment, they should be directing it to the appropriate person, building owner, property manager, etc.
Okay, great. And I guess we'll stay with you, Colleen, on this next one. Who do I contact if I have any questions about this process, about the unilateral scope of work, or just questions? I know you directed us to some websites, but can I speak with somebody? Who would that be?
Yeah, sure. So one of the components of that unilateral lease amendment, we do have a point of contact for you, your lease administration manager. They are our boots on the ground folks, and they will be happy to either answer questions or find answers for you. Again, they are property managers. They're not industrial hygienists, but they have access to some. So please be patient, but we will answer questions as quickly and efficiently as possible. But please use that lease administration manager as your point of contact or your primary point of contact with GSA.
Okay. And then, Colleen, this one, we got another question. I'll throw it your way about the unilateral lease amendment. Is this something that the question about do they have to sign as the owner or the lessor need to sign this and send something back officially with their signature?
Yep. I appreciate you asking. There is no requirement for a lessor counter signature in order for this to be effective. So essentially what we are doing is we're issuing them unilaterally, i.e. we don't need a second signature. And we do have the ability to do this via the changes clause in the lease. And again, we do have that not to exceed amount. So it's not that we're expecting you to just go forth and do without being reimbursed. But we just want to be sure that we are doing this consistently across all of our locations.
Okay, great. Brad, I think I'll direct the next question to you. It's about the unilateral lease amendment, the scope of work. They require testing within GSA's lease space and all common areas. So I know you gave some examples, but can you provide this person is asking, can you provide some more examples of what types of common areas that should or should not be tested?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can kind of retouch on the ones in the presentation and maybe expand on it a little further. So drinking fountains or bottle fillers near that lease space on, for example, the same floor would be prime candidates for testing. Also kind of taking into consideration where folks enter the building, maybe right by their elevator bank as they're making their way up to their space. Any drinking fountains in those locations would also be appropriate for this kind of testing. Essentially anywhere on that path of travel or where those federal tenants or their visitors going into those spaces are going to be passing through or spending time in that they would use to fill up their water bottle or take a drink of water or use to fill their coffee pot, anything for drinking or human consumption kind of purposes. So on the other hand, on the side of that, which we would not include, would be floors that are not included for GSA leases that federal tenants don't have any need to go up into or that are going to be accompanying in. And then please also remember that bathrooms are not included in this effort unless they are the only source of drinking water where that's available to occupants. So to illustrate this, maybe consider a small warehouse lease without any water fountains, without any kitchenettes, where a restroom sink is the only source of water. So in this scenario, an employee using that space would likely rely on that one bathroom sink as their primary source of drinking water, making it kind of that exception to the rule. But otherwise, we wouldn't include bathrooms. And like we talked about, there's that minimum fixture count. But if you don't meet that criteria, let's say you only have one kitchenette and one drinking fountain, or maybe two drinking fountains, just note that on the report that those are the only those are the only outlets primarily designed for human consumption. And that's completely fine. We just need to be able to justify that that's the reason that a minimum of 5 was not tested.
Okay, great. Thanks, Brad. Colleen, I'll throw you the next question here. It says, I'm ready to schedule the testing. Who do I notify and when?
Yeah, so per the unilateral lease amendment, which again, that is your guiding document for this entire effort with its accompanying scope of work. But please be sure to coordinate that testing date with the agency occupant. And we want to make sure that we're having a minimal disruption to our agency's mission activities. We also want to be sure that you all are notifying your GSA lease administration manager that is identified in that unilateral lease amendment no less than 5 days prior to the testing date. So we don't want to surprise our tenants. We want to make sure they have time to adequately plan for folks to access the space.
Great. And then Colleen, I think just there was a little bit of confusion earlier in your presentation. There was a date that said 90 days and you said 30 days. So you just want to clear
Sure.
that up for everybody. Yeah.
Yep. So 90 days from the receipt of the unilateral lease amendment, you are required to have testing report to GSA and our deliverables. You need to start scheduling and coordinating all of that within 30 days in order to meet that 90-day timeline. So I think that may be where the confusion was, and I hope that that answers the question.
Okay, great. And I know we have tons of questions coming in, folks. We're not going to be able to get to all of them, but let's, for the sake of time, we'll take one more question and then we'll do a closing slide I have here. Brad, if you're okay, or anybody else, there are a lot of questions about qualified contractors. Where do I find qualified contractors? I'm a smaller owner or smaller lessor. How do I go about finding a qualified contractor, since it has to be a third party person that does this?
Yeah, absolutely. I can tackle that one. So really, Google is going to be, or a appropriate search engine is going to be your best friend in this type of scenario. There are companies that do this all over the country. Every metropolitan area probably has, a handful, if not more. A really helpful thing is just to use a local search engine and type in environmental consultant or industrial hygiene consultant in your local vicinity or your nearest major city, and you'll be able to find a laundry list of companies that can be able to help you out. And similarly, we've also got a lot of questions where lessors are trying to go directly to laboratories and they're having trouble meeting the requirements of the different parameters. So that's really not the expectation for this, that you go directly to a laboratory. It would be going to that consultant, and then that consultant has the technical knowledge to be able to know who to send those samples to. So when you see the scope of work, if you don't fully understand everything that's in there and the laboratory analytical methods or the requirements for the laboratories, don't worry about that. All you're responsible for doing is finding that qualified professional, and they will have a full understanding of all the information that's in that scope of work and will be able to assist you throughout the process.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. Well, thanks to everybody. And I just wanted to put a plug in here. We will have another industry day event coming up, hopefully this summer, on some upcoming regulatory labor requirements for leases coming down the pike. This industry session, hopefully this summer, will provide an overview of labor requirements, commonly known as the Davis-Bacon Act, or prevailing wages, and the associated impact of executive orders. Particularly, we'll focus on a GSAR case 2021-G530, labor requirements for lease acquisitions, and then also talk about Executive Order 14026, increasing minimum wage for federal contractors, and Executive Order 13706, establishing paid sick leave for federal contractors. So this concludes our presentation today. Thank you to our presenters, Courtney, Crofton, Colleen, and Brad. And thanks to all of you for your attention to this important topic and attending today. We hope this event provided you with the information you need to successfully complete water quality testing in your building this year. Questions that were not answered, and there are quite a few on today's presentation, we will be addressing in writing. When available, the recording of this event and the questions, the slide deck, everything will be emailed to all registrants and posted online. Thank you and have a great rest of the day.